Sure, I can help expand part 1 of your story. While Karen shot my wife and baby at our lake cabin, she had no idea I owned the entire lake. To around 1,000 words. Since you didn't provide the original part 1, I'll write an original version based on the title, starting with a suspenseful and emotional tone, slowly building the scene and characters while hinting at the dramatic twist. Dash dash dash. The air at the lake was usually serene, almost sacred. It was where the mist rolled across the glassy water in the early morning, and birdsong echoed like a symphony for no one but the trees. My wife, Emily, always said it was the one place where she could breathe fully, without the weight of the world pressing on her chest. Our daughter, Sophie, barely a year old, had already grown used to waking up to the sounds of lapping water and the smell of pine drifting through the cabin's screen door. We had bought the place years ago, though most folks around here assumed it was just a family getaway. That was exactly how I wanted it. Quiet. Anonymous. No one needed to know that I owned not just the cabin but the entire lake and the surrounding 600 acres of land. The deed was buried under layers of trust accounts and LLCs for privacy's sake, an intentional barrier between our peaceful retreat and the chaos of the outside world. Which is why what happened that Saturday didn't feel just like a crime, it felt like a betrayal. A fracture in the fabric of the one place I swore I could protect. Emily had taken Sophie out for a morning stroll by the shoreline. I had just finished chopping wood out back when I heard the first crack, loud, sharp, unmistakably a gunshot. For a split second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone hunting illegally. Maybe fireworks. But then came the second shot, followed by a scream that tore through the forest and ripped a hole through me. I dropped the axe without a thought and ran. My boots hit the moss and rocks with clumsy urgency as I sprinted toward the waterline, my heart pounding louder than my steps. And there she was. Emily was crumpled on the ground, clutching her side, blood soaking through her sundress. Sophie lay a few feet away, motionless, her tiny body still, eyes closed. For a second I thought, no, I hoped, that maybe she had just fallen, maybe she was sleeping, maybe. Then I heard a voice. Shrill. Familiar. I told you people this isn't your private lake. You think just because you've got some fancy little cabin, you can break every law rule in the book. I turned and saw her. Karen Matheson. President of the Lakeview Homeowners Association, unofficial neighborhood tyrant, and self-appointed queen of petty grievances. I'd seen her from afar over the years, harassing teens for fishing off the dock, calling animal control because someone's dog wasn't on a leash, filing complaints about the angle of someone's satellite dish. But I'd never spoken to her directly. Mostly because she didn't know me. To her, I was just the man at the cabin, someone to be suspicious of, someone to tolerate from a distance. Now she stood at the edge of the forest, a handgun shaking in her hands. She was wearing that same wide-brimmed sun hat she always wore like a crown, and her face was pale, twisted in righteous anger, not regret. I told you there are rules here. She snapped, as if my wife bleeding out on the ground was some sort of justified punishment for violating a bylaw. No swimming past the buoy line. No unsupervised children. No unauthorized boats. You shot my wife. I roared, my voice cracking with fury. Karen blinked, as though my pain hadn't yet registered. She wouldn't listen. I tried to warn her. You can't just walk wherever you want. This is a protected shoreline, it's managed by the HOA, and I'm authorized to. I didn't hear the rest. I was already by Emily's side, pressing my hands against the wound, whispering that it was going to be okay, that help was on the way, that she had to hold on. My hands were slick with blood, and I could barely hear her soft, shallow breaths. I reached for my phone, thank God it was in my back pocket, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. There's been a shooting at Pine Hollow Lake, I told the dispatcher. 2 victims. 1 adult female, 1 infant. Send everything, ambulance, police, air evac. Please, hurry. I wrapped Sophie in my flannel shirt, praying for movement, a breath, a sound. She whimpered. Faint. Weak, but alive. Karen was still standing there, the gun now dangling by her side. I warned everyone, she muttered to herself. People think they can just take over. This was supposed to be a peaceful community. It was then I realized, she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She believed she was protecting something. She had no idea that the lake she claimed to be safeguarding didn't belong to her. It didn't even belong to the HOA. It belonged to me. Every inch of water, every tree, every cabin lot was legally under my control, registered under a private holding company that had never once disclosed its true ownership. That irony struck me harder than anything else. She was guarding a kingdom she didn't even own, enforcing rules on land she had no claim to. She shot my wife and child under the illusion of authority, because she thought she was the one in charge. The sirens began to echo in the distance, cutting through the still morning air like blades. Karen finally seemed to notice, her posture changing. She looked at the gun in her hand, as if seeing it for the first time. Her eyes darted to me, then to Emily, then to Sophie. Wait, I didn't mean, she started. Drop the gun, I said, my voice low and cold. She did. The deputies arrived minutes later, weapons drawn, yelling commands. Karen went down quietly, her arms raised, still mumbling about rules and regulations, as if that would justify anything. The paramedics loaded Emily and Sophie onto stretchers, and I went with them, my shirt stained red, my hands shaking, my world unmoored. But as the ambulance sped away, I wasn't just thinking about whether my wife and daughter would make it. I was thinking about what would come next. Because Karen had no idea what she'd really done, not just to my family, but to herself. She'd picked a fight on my land. My lake. My rules. And now, the consequences were mine to decide. Sure, I can help expand part 2 of that story. Since you've only provided the title, HOA Karen shot my wife and baby at our lake cabin, she had no idea I owned the entire lake. But not the content of part 1 or part 2, I'll need to invent plausible narrative context to continue the story logically in line with that dramatic title. Here's a 1,000-word expansion of part 2, assuming part 1 set up the initial conflict, Karen being a controlling HOA president, my family retreating to our lake cabin, a confrontation escalating, and the shocking act of violence taking place. I stood there frozen, my phone clutched in one hand and the 911 operator still trying to get my attention. The sounds around me faded, my ears rang with a high-pitched tone that drowned everything else out. My wife's scream, the baby's shrill cries, the sharp crack of Karen's gun, they looped in my head like a terrible symphony. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. Karen, the self-appointed HOA president and now would-be murderer, was already in handcuffs by then. Sheriff Blake knew me from high school, and when he saw the blood on my shirt, he went pale. He didn't even ask questions. Just read Karen her rights while she ranted about how we weren't authorized to use the lakefront property. She was trespassing on my land. Karen shrieked, kicking at the gravel as they dragged her toward the cruiser. They don't even live here full-time. They don't pay the dues. Sheriff Blake gave me a look, as if to say, is she serious right now? My daughter, thank God, had only suffered a graze. The bullet tore through her stroller's frame and clipped her arm, enough to bleed but not enough to cause lasting damage. My wife wasn't so lucky. She'd stepped in front of the stroller instinctively, and the bullet had struck her shoulder at an angle, missing vital organs by a miracle. She was conscious, trying to keep our baby calm as she bled onto the wooden dock. The medics got her stable enough for the helicopter. I rode with them, gripping her hand the entire time. Her eyes searched mine, not with fear, but something else, confusion. Shock. As if she still couldn't believe what had happened. Frankly, neither could I. That night at the hospital, after the doctors confirmed both my girls would pull through, I sat alone in the waiting room, the flickering fluorescent lights doing nothing to soothe the storm in my chest. That's when I made the decision. Karen had messed with the wrong person. What she never realized What none of those WA people ever realized was that I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the land it sat on. The cove, the surrounding forest, the trails, the docks, the lake itself, all 270 acres, right down to the water rights. I bought it under an LLC 10 years ago when the old timber company folded and divested all its rural holdings. But I never flaunted it. Never saw the point. I let the WA run their little affairs, plant their flowers, organize bake sales and pontoon parades. I paid dues even though I legally didn't have to. I let them send me passive-aggressive letters about trash bins and holiday decorations. I let Karen shout at me for building a custom boathouse without permission. Why? Because I didn't care. I wanted peace. This place was my retreat. A gift for my family. A sanctuary. But peace was no longer on the table. The very next morning, I met with my attorney, Hank Talbot. He was a bulldog in court and had drawn up the original land purchase contract years ago. She what? He asked when I told him everything. Shot them both. Over property access. He leaned back in his chair, lips tight, and then stood. I'll file an emergency injunction against the WA today. And we're going after her personally, too. Good. But I want more than that, I said, voice low. I want them all off my land. Every dock, every pump, every trail they've cut into my forest. I want it all back. Hank gave a small nod. It's time they found out who really owns the lake. Over the next few days, the gears of justice began to grind. Karen was denied bail. No surprise there, considering the violent charges. News spread fast, as it always does in small towns. The local paper ran with the headline, WA President Arrested in Lake Cabin Shooting. They didn't print my name, but everyone knew. Whispers turned to speculation, speculation into shock when the lawsuits hit their mailboxes. I wasn't just suing Karen. I was terminating all easements granted to the WA, easements I had allowed out of goodwill but never legally recorded. The board was in panic mode. Their lawyer, a green suburban type who probably specialized in zoning permits, called Hank trying to negotiate. We didn't take the call. Meanwhile, I was at the cabin, walking the land with a survey team and a drone operator. We documented every encroachment. Benches, signs, illegal docks, even a community volleyball court half constructed on my land. Every item was flagged. I'd give the residents 90 days to remove everything. And then I'd fence it all off. The hardest part was explaining to some of the good neighbors, people like Jim and Arlene, who had brought us casseroles when my wife came home from the hospital. They were kind, caught in the crossfire, unaware of Karen's worst excesses. I wish it didn't have to be this way, I told them as we sat on my porch. But she pulled a gun. On my baby. Jim nodded, grave. She's been unhinged for years. We all knew it. Just never thought it'd go this far. It did, I said. And now it ends. Word got out that I was taking the lake back. Some were angry. Some were confused. Others, quietly thankful. I started getting anonymous letters in my mailbox. One read, "Thank you for standing up to her. We never could." Another said, "I'll miss the dock, but I understand. Please don't let her come back." I wouldn't. Karen was facing multiple felony charges, including attempted murder, aggravated assault, and endangering a minor. Her trial was set for later in the year, but I wouldn't be there. I didn't need to see her again. Justice would be handled by the system, and by the lake itself. Because in the end, this lake wasn't just water and trees and shoreline. It was the backdrop of my family's healing. It was ours, truly and legally. Karen had believed she ruled over a kingdom she didn't even own. And when she tried to defend that fantasy with a gun, she shattered the illusion, and everything else. But we would rebuild. Not just the dock or the cabin. Our peace. Our safety. And I'd make sure no one ever threatened it again.